So welcome back to this next video. This is where we ended. We repeated the code on how to populate an array. For those of you who had forgotten, I recommend you go back to week 3 and you build this yourself. Okay, before we actually get on and create our object, we mentioned arrays and mechanisms of the last point we made in the previous video. The thing that you see the most, that word is actually array. That's poorly written. Okay, let's detail out some more issues. One of the big issues with this style of coding, let's see if I can squeeze this over a bit. So I'm just going to get you to look at it. Right, one issue with that type of coding is, well, let's draw it out. There are several issues. The first is, yes, all the mechanisms are visible and implemented in the main. So if you want to add stuff, if you want to do further analysis, what you would do is you would add another method. But notice this is proceeding in a linear way. All the code is executed in a procedural way. So actually, main code in a main doesn't follow object-based programming. It follows procedural practice. It follows what we call the procedural paradigm. It goes all the way back to the language of C and its family of languages. It's pre-object based coding. So what? What difference does it make? Well, it doesn't scale up. You can't get beyond a certain level of complexity if all your functions and all the things you're doing have to follow one after the other like that. It doesn't give you an option of actually interfacing with data and doing different things at different times. It's very limited. This is one of the reasons object-based and object-oriented programming came about. The procedural approach, which we've just seen there, was too limited. So to move to objects, we will hide our data, hide the mechanisms, and we'll do something slightly different. So that's the first thing to note. Perhaps the second thing to note is that reusing any of this code is just a question of copying and pasting it. I could throw that into a subroutine and into different subroutines and build up a kind of a bunch of helper functions, which we started doing at the beginning. But although that's useful for console interaction, beyond that, it gets really cluttered. And actually, one fundamental issue is that this array and the procedures and operations on it aren't logically connected. They all exist in the same sequence, but there's no logical connection. And if you create an object over here to say populate the array, you get the array length, you ask it this, and then you return it. There's actually no logical connection between that operation, that operation and the data. Now that's a critical and quite subtle concept. I'll come back to that, right? Let's very briefly, if I can, how quickly can I illustrate it? No, I won't illustrate it because we'll get sidetracked. Okay, so let me just reiterate the point. That procedure, if I put it in a static function and passed it the value of the length and also the array, and then returned from it the array, it would do the job. But what it would lack is, well, there's quite a few different issues. There's no logical connection between this data and the operations on it other than they sit in the same file. If you create a separate file to manage it, that file will have the procedures, the functions, but it won't have the data. The data and the functions are kept apart. So that made me jump. Right, so this is the one critical weakness of static classes. The data that you want to operate on and the operations, which are all defined statically, right? Because you can't store the data inside the same file. There's no logical connection. There's a split. And this creates its own problems, huge issues. The most logical way to build code is to combine the data and the operations together in a single object. So the data and the operations all are logically tied together. That's what object-oriented programming does. So keep that image in mind. Okay, so we have some issues with this, right? So what we're going to do is move towards coding it. Okay, before we do and get onto the coding, I will now pause this video, give you a chance just to chew that over, and then when we come back, we will work our way through it.